We marched further down by the side of the river through thickets of hollow bamboos and brambles, being also very weak for want of food. But Providence suffered us not to perish, though hunger and weariness had brought us even to death's door. This is an excerpt from a 1679 account from the Welsh explorer Lionel Wafer's attempt to cross the Darien Gap, the narrow isthmus that connects the country of Colombia to Panama, the stretch of steep jungle terrain that has been known since the earliest accounts as deadly and nearly impassable. An article from Lonely Planet magazine from the year 2000 covered hikes in Central America, but when it came to the Darien Gap, it told its most adventurous readers to, quote, "Don't even think about it." For years, migrants traveled north using different routes, either charter planes or boats or other less dangerous highways. But when migration reached a then record high in 2015, the United States put pressure on South and Central American countries to rein in and deter migration north, to close popular routes, to deny people visas to fly to the United States. But migration didn't stop. It simply changed and pushed people toward riskier routes. The Darien Gap used to be used by cartels, primarily to smuggle drugs and weapons, but today it's a different story. The roughly 70-mile stretch of thick jungle has become a key part of the journey for millions of people who are attempting to migrate north. The United States estimates that roughly 800,000 people may attempt to cross the Darien Gap this year alone. That's up about 50% from last year's number. And the fastest growing demographic showing up to make the deadly journey are children under the age of 5. The investigative reporter for The Atlantic, Caitlin Dickerson, and the wartime photojournalist Lindsay Addario visited the Darien Gap, joining groups of migrants on their voyages. Their remarkable story, 70 miles in the Darien Gap, is the cover story for next month's issue of The Atlantic magazine. Dickerson and Addario's reporting is breathtaking. It depicts the physical, the emotional, the financial, and the political toll of migration. Families with toddlers pass the impassable, navigating both treacherous terrain and the dangerous and corrupt human systems that have formed around migration, including cartels and indigenous communities whose local economies have come to rely on money from migrants, charging them for water, for food, for shelter, for transport, even for Wi-Fi. Quote, "The foliage closed in from all sides, making the path hard to discern. We stepped over the jaguar tracks and past a bothrops, the deadliest viper in South America, coiled around a branch near our ankles. In a ravine, we saw what looked like the scene of a person's bad fall, a tennis shoe, a skull, and the bones of a leg without a bandage, with a bandage wrapped around the knee like a tourniquet. The next morning, we faced the route's hardest obstacles, a series of rock faces. Ropes had been strung across some of them, but it was impossible to know which were secure enough to hold on to. Oh my God, I can't watch," Maria Fernandez said when her 7-year-old daughter crossed the rock. She covered her eyes and shouted, "Hold on tight, my princess." When it was an 8-year-old girl named Catherine's turn, she slipped and fell into the rocky river about 15 feet below. Her mother, who had been right behind her, stood frozen, while one of the porters jumped into the water after her. Catherine emerged crying but uninjured. We started hiking again almost immediately. No one wanted to contemplate the near miss any longer than they had to. Caitlin Dickerson writes that in her 3 trips to the Darien Gap over 5 months, she witnessed new bridges and paved roads appear. She saw porters film videos of migrants asking them to smile and confirm that they were treated well as the route became more established before her eyes. Those videos, Dickerson says, are put out on social media by porters and guides who try to sell the trip across the jungle. She writes in the story, the UN has tried to counteract those messages by stationing migration officials at bus stations and other checkpoints along the way to the Darien Gap. They warn people of the dangers ahead. They try to persuade them to reconsider. Those efforts have been largely ineffective. People come with tunnel vision, like, I must get to the United States. Christian Camilo Morena Garcia, a United Nations migration official based in northern Colombia, told me. Turning back is not an option. Joining me now are the incredible Caitlin Dickerson, investigative reporter and feature writer for The Atlantic, and Lindsay Addario, a photojournalist who has been covering conflicts, humanitarian crisis, and women's issues around the Middle East and Africa and all around the world for more than 2 decades. Welcome to you both. Thank you for your remarkable reporting. Lindsay, I want to start with you, and I want to put this photograph up here because we were talking about the treacherous nature of this, the physical treachery of this trek. I want to ask you about this photo. It's one of the many difficult parts of this trek. You can see people traversing a slippery rock wall above a river. There's a lot of really dangerous parts of this trek. We talked about paved roads and bridges, but there's a lot of this too.
I mean, to be honest, there weren't paved roads really where we crossed. That came later in the journey. But that particular moment was where Caitlin described the little girl falling into the river. And it was, I couldn't believe myself. I'm a seasoned war correspondent, and I couldn't believe that children were making this journey, literally scaling wet boulders, trying to hold on. Kids, toddlers, I mean, from 2 years old to babies strapped onto their parents. It was treacherous and terrifying.
Caitlin, I want to play a video for the viewers now of a 9-year-old boy from Vietnam. It's important to note there are people from all over the world who are making this journey. The video was taken by his mother about a month before the two of them attempted to cross the Darien Gap. You'll see Khan on a phone. He's using a language learning app, Duolingo, as he practices English because he's getting prepared to move to the United States. Let's watch this.
Yes, coffee with milk, please.
Yes, coffee with milk.
Yes, coffee with milk, please.
Please. Please.
Caitlin, tell me a bit more about Khan and his mother.
So Khan and his mother are in some ways typical people moving through the Darien Gap right now. Children are the fastest growing group. 30,000 children crossed the Darien Gap in the first 4 months of this year alone. And as you pointed out correctly, there are people from all over the world making this journey. One of the reasons I think their story is especially important, it's obviously harrowing and tragic. I mean, Khan's death, he was swept away by a flash flood, crossing a river just as we did on the same route that we did only a week afterward. His mother never saw him. That was last December. They're an important example because they decided to make this journey after Khan's mother saw on the internet videos that had been posted by smugglers depicting the Darien Gap as a journey on a paved road, an easier one. And so she felt it seemed doable and decided to make this journey. And so I talk in the story about how the deterrent policies that the United States has pushed kind of in a vacuum as a way to crack down on migration have handed migrants over to smugglers who are happy to bring along not just people who feel like they need to migrate, but people like Khan's mom, who said to me she would have made a different choice if she knew what they were getting into, and she's lost her son.
Lindsay, I want to put up a photo of Panamanian soldiers outside a small makeshift rest camp in the Darien Gap. What is this of?
So this is a camp, a new camp that Caitlin and I did not see the first time around. It sprung up sort of after our first trip. And this is one of the rest stops where migrants on their journey are able to stop. They can buy water, some food, rest for however long overnight, and then continue on. These rest stops are imperative to people who want to stay alive and who need to rehydrate, for people who have run out of food. A lot of the migrants help each other. So if people run out of money or if they need something, they help each other. We met a woman there who had broken her ankle, and migrants had carried her to this rest stop, and she was literally just sitting there, but was able to stay alive, essentially because this existed. And a few days after we went to this place, the Panamanian soldiers sent a front, burn this place to the ground.
Wow.
In a sort of show of force, which was ridiculous because obviously they knew about it, but it seemed like they were doing it to show the journalists and show the world that they were fighting against immigration, which we found problematic.
Caitlin, I want to go back to the story of Khan and his mother as an example. When we talk about immigration, we talk about the southern border. That's where most people come into the United States if they're crossing a physical border. Your story with Lindsay shows how much more complex this issue is. They're crossing from the southern border. We used to think it was Mexicans. It's mostly not Mexicans these days, but people come from all over the world to South America, work their way up through Central America, or they start in Central America, work their way up through Mexico with the intention to eventually reach the United States. There's an entire economy built throughout this thing on the flow of people, gangs, porters, towns that supply them with things that they need, villages that have come to actually economically depend on these migrants coming through. So when you look at a solution to the southern border, you kind of have to, everybody's got to read your piece and look at those photographs and really think of this much more holistically.
I think that's right. I mean, we have such a precise focus on the southern border in the United States. And look, you have Americans on all sides of the aisle more and more indicating a concern about immigration. You know, they see disorder at the border and they want something that feels like a more organized system. The problem, though, with only looking at Texas and Arizona and California is that you're not seeing where these journeys begin, thousands and thousands of miles away from the border, with all these intermediaries along the way. Migration always includes money changing hands. But the question is it a mutually beneficial relationship where you have a fisherman in a poor community in southern Panama making $20 to put some migrants in his fishing boat and drive them up the coast of Panama to help them get north where they're going to go anyway? Or is it an exploitative exchange of funds where you have a cartel moving in and saying, okay, well, if the government isn't going to facilitate this movement, I'm already moving drugs and weapons, so I'll go ahead and move people too, without any regard for whether they actually survive.
Yeah, except that the key point of that conversation is the guy who's sort of steeped in economics is making $20 a day, right? Like at that point, all options are open to you, because if you can make $30 a day, or you can make $100 a day, or in America, you can work on a farm and make $150 a day, changes the entire equation. Lindsay, let's talk about this photo of one of the families you met along the way. It shows a man named Bergkhan with his kids, who are, as you both have mentioned, young children on this route, 2 years old and 8 years old, his wife's cousin and her young children.
Correct. And we followed them for a bit more than a day, about a day and a half through the journey. And of course, I can only think of my own children. I have a 5-year-old, and so I have a son who's pretty close in age, and he carried him on his shoulders for most of the journey. The second half of the first day was literally an incline about 75 degrees, and
wow.
roots and slippery roots, and, you know, on either side, a sort of crevasse where if he had slipped, he could have fallen. And he describes a moment where he thought that he was going to lose his son. And we have heard stories of people who have slipped and who have lost hold of their children. And so, you know, I think for us, it was really about trying to get the more personal stories, really trying to understand. You know, Caitlin did an extraordinary job, obviously, of interviewing people and understanding why they're making this journey, what exactly they're in search of, and how difficult it is. And I think for me as a photographer, I'm always looking for those moments of emotion. And, you know, this is a moment where he's so overwhelmed and exhausted. And obviously, with us making the journey, we can now understand just how bad it is.